real, sincere, deep call to be stewards of creation. And yet we know that we don't always, as individuals, within our parishes, within our schools, we don't always live up to that call to be good stewards. I have to tell you a story. This is my pastor, Father Larry. Father Larry is this very tall fellow. He's 6'6". And because he's so tall, he tends to be a little bit clumsy. And he will even say he wishes that he's always wished that he was just a little bit shorter, because he just finds it hard sometimes to keep himself coordinated. I happen to live in an area that is built around what used to be a train line. And the train, closed a number of years ago, and so they've taken the train line and they've put in a bicycle trail. So it's a 150-mile rails to trails area, and we're one of the on points. So everything in our little town revolves around cycling. There are running stores, there are bicycle shops, there are little restaurants and ice cream stores and all that. It's just part of our culture. So it's not uncommon in the summertime to, kind of wrap up your day by 4 or 4:30 so that you can get out and get a good bike ride in before the evening. And so in August, Father Larry did that. Except that by August, the sun is starting to set a little bit sooner than what we're accustomed to, and it started to get dark while he was riding. You get to that dusk point where you're just not seeing things in quite the way that you would. So Father Larry gets out on the bike trail, and he gets maybe a mile onto the trail from town, and he sees a stick in the middle of the trail. Well, he's thinking to himself, people ride down this trail really, really fast. That's not safe. So he gets off his bicycle and he goes to pick up the stick, except it isn't a stick. It's a snake. And it so startled him that he fell and he broke his tibia. And then he had to get himself back to town. You can only imagine what kind of pain he must have been in getting himself back to town. And so he comes in to Mass the following weekend, and he says, here's the deal. He says, it's like the garden and a snake and the fall of man. He was in one of those big boots for, 2 months, and he still is having to wear a thing around his ankle to make sure that he's careful in these long places and so on. But I have thought about that so often. And it's interesting because the week after Father Larry had his fall, I was riding down the bike trail, and this woman was coming toward me, and she was riding really slowly, and she said something. And at first I didn't hear what she said, and so I stopped, and I said, please, which is the Cincinnatian's way of saying pardon me. And she says, there's a snake up ahead. I went, oh, thank you so much. We need to be people who recognize the snakes. We need to be people who recognize that sometimes our human tendency to be selfish, to be pointed toward what we want or what we think we need, sometimes we need to point ourselves around, and we need to gain a different sort of perspective. And we do that together. We do that by accepting the call to be the transparency through whom God is seen, to be that person, that organization that is committed to stewarding all of this very well. Pope Francis has talked about this a number of times, and I love what he said just a few months ago. He said, creation is not a property which we can rule over at will, or even less, the property of only a few. Creation is a gift. It is a wonderful gift that God has given us so that we care for it and we use it for the benefit of all, always with great respect and gratitude. And then he gets a little bit strong and he says, safeguard creation, because if we destroy creation, creation will destroy us. Never forget this. And he feels so strongly about this that he has said that his next encyclical will actually be about care for the environment and the connection between care for the environment and care for the poor. And so I think we need to be attuned to that. As we think about the green news, we're going to be watching and listening for Pope Francis's perspective on all of this. One of the things that I have to give you to take back to your parishes and your schools is a talk that Archbishop Wensky from Miami just gave at the bishops' meeting last week, where he talks about the importance of our thinking about and proactively being good stewards of creation. And he even says, you know, most of the time when we think about stewardship, we're thinking about our financial resources, but we're called to so much more than that. And so I think there are a number of things that we can think about as we really peer into this whole idea of being good stewards of creation. I happened to find a talk by Bishop Porteus from Sydney. He's one of their auxiliary bishops. And I know in my visit to Australia 5 years ago, I know they're having very similar conversations to the ones that we are having. They're realizing not only in the Great Barrier Reef, but in their interior, the impact of people over the course of many centuries. And so I found his comments very inspiring. He says, we need to remember that human beings and creation are interrelated. I think so much of the time, that's really the place where we first need to stop and remember that we're not independent of creation. All of our technology, all of our trappings can dull us to that reality, that we are interrelated with creation. He says the dignity of the human person is foundational to our being entrusted as stewards of creation. God has trusted us, has entrusted us with the stewardship of creation. And so when we fail to do so, we're actually failing in our responsibility as human beings. He goes on to say that stewardship will value creation in its own right, not simply for its utilitarian purposes for us. And I think that's something really important to keep in mind. We tend to look at everything in relationship to how can it serve me. And yet he reminds us that, you know, stewardship of creation has a value in and of itself. And then he goes on to say, as moral beings, we must recognize our human failure in environmental degradation and our responsibility for the present and the future. It's not that we can undo the past, but we certainly can take this particular moment and say from this point on, we are going to try to create a different path in relationship to creation. So a few things for us to keep in mind, and then we're going to take a little bit of time to talk about this together. First of all, we're all brothers and sisters. All is a gift. And actually, it's more than a gift. It's that we have a responsibility for stewarding that really is God's, our lives, our resources. And it begins with gratitude and involves shared responsibility. I loved that in our opening conversations, Damien named the gratitude, you know, and it's gratitude for being able to be here together. But, you know, there's also this call to simply be grateful for all that surrounds us, whether it's sunshine or snow or rain. I know here, I happened to be here in September when it rained one night, you know, and everybody was saying, oh my gosh, thank you, we need more, we need more. Absolutely. You know, in my part of the country, we keep saying, could we send a little bit of it west? Because we were soggy all summer, yeah, and I wish we could, you know. Unfortunately, the weather tends to go in the opposite direction, you know, so we have much for which to be grateful and much for which to be responsible. We also are called to cultivate and care for the environment, and I think we can recognize that each of us has the potential to have both a positive and a negative impact. And I think that's part of what you said about what we want to teach our children and their parents. You know, we want to help one another to realize that we have the potential for making a real positive difference in all of the little ways that we can and all of the big ways that we can. We also have the possibility of having a negative impact if we're not mindful and care for. Our call is to do more than simply not to do harm. You know, we really have an awful lot that we need to be thinking about, and we need to be actively contributing. And that's something that our bishops say in their pastoral letter on stewardship. They actually make the connection with, you know, in the creation narrative, we really don't hear about work until after the fall. And then we hear, that the people are told, you're going to work, you're going to toil, and women are going to, have pain in childbirth and so on and so forth. But we have to remember that that is after the fall. That God's initial creation and God's initial creation plan is that human beings and He will collaborate together in this ongoing process of creation. And we do that in the ways in which we work, in the ways in which each of us, as people who bear the image and likeness of God, have a contribution to make. And it's an active contribution. It's not simply not harming, but we actually have something to contribute to this important cause together. And so what I'd like to invite us to do, in this conversation we're going to take a little bit of time for, so maybe 15, maybe 20 minutes. I'd like to invite you, first of all, just to share in your cluster what stands out for you as you've thought about, and I'm sure that this was not the first time that you've ever thought about stewardship of creation. What stands out for you? What's that nugget of something that you want to be able to take back to the people that you're going to be talking with as you think about all of this together? What is that intersection or that connection between stewardship of creation and sustainability? That really is what brings us here together today. And then thirdly, and this is the conversation that I want us to take a little bit longer with, is simply what does sustainability include? When you think of that word, what does that word mean for you? What comes to mind as you're thinking about sustainability for your school or for your parish?